We begin this hour looking live at Ottawa and Washington with a CBC Radio Canada exclusive. Sources tell our colleagues that the Trump administration wants an entry fee from Ottawa before the U.S. will even come to the table to resume customs trade negotiations this spring or summer. So there's lots to unpack here. First, we want to talk about that formal date, which has not even been set for the resumption of Canada-U.S. trade talks. We know the U.S. will sit down with Mexican officials at the end of May, but there's no word yet on Canada's round of talks. There has, however, been a lot of talk about conditions and concessions just to get to the table in the first place. On the American side, dairy, digital sovereignty, and the pulling of U.S. booze from liquor store shelves. And Canada, of course, has its own concerns. Here's what Prime Minister Mark Carney told reporters heading into today's caucus meetings in Ottawa.
We understand what some of what the Americans would call trade irritants or trade issues are. We have some on our side as well. We're well prepared around those issues. We will sit down and work through those issues with the broader approach in the negotiation. We've made some counter proposals, which they're aware, and the time will come to really roll up our sleeves.
And Radio Canada's Parliamentary Bureau Chief Daniel Thibault broke this story. He now joins us with more on this entry fee being demanded by the U.S.
To our sources, it means giving something up to attract the White House attention, the president's attention, giving something up without necessarily getting something back in return. You've heard Mark Carney earlier, who's obviously not very willing to go in that direction, talking about not the kind of negotiation that Canada wants to entertain. This is described by some of our sources that would be described as a show of good faith to show the U.S. that there is a willingness to entertain a conversation the same way the Mexican officials are entertaining a conversation right now with the White House. They seem to be gaining some ground. They've got a date to start the official negotiation. They've given up some, they've made some concession, but arguably without getting anything back from the U.S. And so from Canada's point of view at this point, it's, well, what's in it for us? If we're going to give something up, we need to get something back. And right now, the point of view that we're hearing back from sources in the U.S. is, well, give something up so that you catch our attention, and we'll see what happens after that. There has been no gain from Canada's part on those concessions. The digital tax, the abandonment of some counter tariffs, were seen as a way to move the discussions forward, and yet there was nothing gained from Canada by giving up those things. So that makes it even harder for Canadian representative in the provinces to look at giving up something else. Some of the stuff that's regularly mentioned by U.S. representative, according to our sources, is, for example, the return of U.S. booze on Canadian shelves, wine, beer, spirits coming from the U.S. that the White House would like to see back on shelves in Ontario and Quebec and BC. That's something that's been discussed between Ottawa and the provinces, and there is a strong consensus that it's not going to happen unless we're getting something back out of it and we're moving forward with the negotiations. It's the strong patriotic sense that it's the right thing to do right now. In fact, Mr. Carney even mentioned it in his speech in front of the Liberal Convention in Montreal a couple of weeks ago. The other thing that's been mentioned by some sources is dairy. Some U.S. would like to see some adjustments on the quotas, for example, making sure that American cheese producers, for example, can sell their products directly on grocery store shelves in Canada. That would be a very, very hard things to sell, particularly in Quebec and Ontario, because this is something that the federal government has already mentioned they were not willing to move on. But that's been part of the conversation. You've heard Mark Carney earlier. There doesn't seem to be any flexibility or any willingness to go in that direction. It'll be interesting to see what it does, what it creates as a reaction on the U.S. side with Jameson Greer, for example, or Howard Lutnick. Will they see that as a firm stand adopted by Canada, and will this slow down even more the negotiation? We'll keep an eye on that later today.
That's Radio Canada's Parliamentary Bureau Chief Danielle Thibault in Ottawa. And there has been a lot of reaction to this story broken by our French colleagues. We know that ministers have been talking about it, as well as the Prime Minister. Now, the minister responsible for Canada-US trade, Dominic LeBlanc, spoke earlier today, and here's what he said about the approaching July 1st date for the review of CUSMA.
We're ready when the Americans are ready to sit down and get that agreement. And as I say, our hope is that it happens before July 1st. If it doesn't, we're ready to work this summer, and we're ready to do what's necessary to get to a tripartite agreement.
And we know also that moments ago, the finance minister was asked whether Canada should make any more concessions in order to get to the bargaining table with the United States. Here's François-Philippe Champagne.
Well, it's not about concession, it's about making a deal, but the right deal for Canada. Well, you know, there are things to be done on both sides. This needs to be a win-win situation. What I would say is that if you look at the position of Canada today in the world, coming back from Washington, 85% of our trade is subject to the exemption. We have the lowest effective tariff rate than any country about in the world. So I would say our strategy to engage, to defend Canadian industry, Canadian workers has been working because the numbers speaks for themselves.
There's industries that are being very hard hit. One of the numbers is 50% tariffs. So
I agree. Well, you're quite right in a sense, depending which industry, if you're in softwood lumber, if you're in the auto industry, in the steel or aluminum industry, it's felt very differently. What I'm saying is that on the aggregate, Canada still has the best possible deal with the United States that you can have today.
Are you seeing any signs of progress during your talks in the U.S. about
I think the tone was positive. Just don't take it from me. Look at the readout that was issued by the Secretary of the Treasury. It was a very constructive, positive discussion. We spoke for almost an hour, I think. We understand that there's things on both sides. They understand that Canada is their largest customer, and 2/3 of their states have Canada as their first export market. So it's something.
Okay, so let's get some more insight now on all of this from someone who knows a lot about cross-border relations. Louise Blais is a former Canadian ambassador to the United Nations and former consul general in Atlanta. She also attended several trade-related meetings in Washington just last week. She joins us now from Quebec City. Thank you for making time for us today.
Happy to be with you, Arthi.
So we know that the U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, for example, has compared negotiations with the U.S. to purchasing a Costco membership, saying, quote, you have to pay before you can shop. What do you make of this reporting that we're seeing, of course, and you've talked about this, that there should be an entry fee or concessions made before Canada even comes to the table?
Right. Well, just to take the quote from Howard Lutnick, I think it's very much his style to simplify matters that way and to couch it as if Canada owes the United States something. It is the position that the president is trying to take, that really they are coming from strength and we are the asker here. I think we have to be careful not to fall into that trap. I think, this is the issue when we talk about being dependent on the United States. I think we forget to also say in that same breath is the United States is dependent on us. They need our fertilizer, they need our oil, they need our agricultural products, they need our services, and many, many other, our aluminum, our steel even. So I think everyone's trying to find the right stance, but I think Canada has to make sure that we say, look, we've got things you want. And when it comes to a quote-unquote entry fee, I think at this point, what I'm hearing when I'm in the United States is they want a sense that Canada wants to make a deal. And for right or for wrong, for some reason in the United States, in Washington, D.C., there's a sense that Canada has been slow to come to the table. I think it's unfair, but it is the impression that has been set, and the president is benefiting from that. So I think we have to change our register and really look and say we're ready, just as Mexico is, to talk substantively.
From all the conversations you have had, why do you think that is? Why do you think that perception exists with the U.S. counterparts that you're talking to?
Well, I think it's the contrast with Mexico that is apparent to everyone. They have gone at it. They have taken a completely different approach. They've gone down the list of irritants that they have checked off and dealt with. with the, we're talking about 50 here. It's not just one or two, but anything from security to trade to China, they have sought to prepare the table for the USMCA renewal that would be the best set. So, whereas Canada, we are seen to having wanting to keep all of the levers together, not make concessions, and your reporting was talking about that. We did make two important concessions, one of which was countermeasures on something that the U.S. did not apply tariffs on. They never applied tariffs on USMCA compliant goods, but we did for a long time, many months more than they did. So to them, that's not a concession, that's just making things right. I'm not arguing the Americans' point here. I'm just trying to make sure that your viewers understand the mindset of the United States. The digital tax, that was a concession to kick the conversation again. And so I totally understand and agree with our government's position not to give something else for nothing in return. We have to make sure now that they understand that we are willing to negotiate substantively. There are most of the irritants they have with us now, they've been there forever. They've been there for a very long time, even before Donald Trump. These are things that should not derail an entire relationship, and we need to take them one by one, and we need to bring relief to those sectors affected by the 232 tariffs.
So I want to focus in on something that you mentioned here, and I know that you're saying that you're just talking about the perception that exists, that really it felt like getting rid of countermeasures and as well as the digital services tax as well, which took place last year, the removal of that was just sort of evening out the playing field. That's the perception from the United States based on the discussions that you've had. So what would an entry fee or concessions to get to the table look like from the Canadian side?
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. And there may not be a good answer for it because things change all the time. I think, but probably two things. One is, I think we have to show that we care, that this is important, that we value the relationship with the United States. I think we're sending mixed signals when we say that we want to divert away, which we should, and we should have done it 10 years ago. But the insistence on this is irritating to them. I think we should do it and maybe talk about it a little bit less. That would be just, so in other words, mind the tone, mind the words, keep it positive, forward thinking. I would say, we had a spat. We can say we have a dispute with our neighbor, and this happens all the time. We all had them about who's going to pay for the fence and whose side of the fence is the fence on at the end of the day. But I think sometimes inviting your neighbor over for a coffee and have a good conversation could help. Jameson Greer of the USTR was just in Mexico on Monday. Why don't we, Canada, invite him in Ottawa? We should continue to go to DC, but we've made many, many trips already. It'd be great to see the USTR, Jameson Greer in Canada, and that would show, it would be a show of goodwill. So I'm not saying we haven't made the invitation, but I'd like to see it being made if it hasn't. So
you're suggesting here that Canada does a better job of playing nice, and that might, if I'm interpreting your words correctly, involve perhaps less Davos-style speeches and, YouTube videos that call the relationship perhaps a weakness, and more, those sorts of pleasantries between the two. So is that more posturing? Is there any evidence that something like that, an approach like that, might work? Well, look, I was really heartened by what Janice Charette, our negotiator-in-chief, said yesterday. She explained it very, very well in a very balanced way. We do have our own issues that we want to discuss with the United States. It's not just them with us. This will be a bumpy ride. It will not be easy. But this is the most important relationship for Canada, bar none, and will be for a long time. And as she said, USMCA is tremendously important. It is to them as well, and so those signals, I think, are extremely positive. And I think more of that will help. They listen, they pay attention, and I think that
framing it in that way, and she defended our interests. Her position was extremely well balanced, is something that they can understand. And I think it can only help.
Well, I want to thank you so much for those insights. Of course, I have so many more questions, but we don't have any more time to spend here. So thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll have this conversation again. That is former Canadian Ambassador to the United Nations, Louise Blais, and she joined us today from Quebec City.